What if I told you that right now, at this very moment, the most powerful military in human history is losing a war it never expected to fight, and the country it was supposed to destroy in weeks is now dictating terms that could reshape the entire world order? Stick around because what happened next will blow your mind. Right now, as you watch this, something unprecedented is unfolding across the Middle East. Every assumption Washington made about this conflict has been shattered. Every prediction about quick victory has collapsed, and the nation that was supposed to crumble under American firepower is not only standing, it is advancing. If you want to understand the real story behind the headlines, the truth mainstream media refuses to tell you, smash that like button and let the world know you are paying attention. Every click helps spread the information that powerful interests want buried. You see, for months, we have been told that Iranian missile capabilities have been degraded by 70, 80, even 90%. We have been assured that their military infrastructure lies in ruins. But here is what nobody in Washington wants you to know. Every single time someone announces that Iran has been neutralized, they launch precision-guided missiles with 2,000-pound warheads that devastate their targets with surgical accuracy. Let me repeat that so it lands properly. The weapons being fired right now are not the desperate salvos of a defeated nation. They are the most advanced, most accurate, most devastating weapons in Iran's arsenal, and they are hitting exactly what they aim at. President Trump himself said recently that Iranian missiles are not very accurate. Nothing could be further from the truth. These weapons are extremely accurate, and that is precisely why Iran does not need to fire as many as they did at the beginning of this conflict. They have evolved, they have adapted, and they are systematically eliminating capabilities with each strike. But here is where the story takes a turn that should terrify every strategist in the Pentagon. Stay with me because what I am about to reveal changes everything we thought we understood about modern warfare. At the beginning of this conflict, Iran fired massive barrages of missiles, hundreds at a time. Western analysts mocked them, calling it desperation, calling it inefficiency. But those analysts missed the real strategy entirely. Iran was not trying to overwhelm defenses with those early strikes. They were depleting them. Think about that for a moment. Every interceptor missile fired by Israel, by the Gulf states, by American naval vessels, that is one less missile in the arsenal. And here is the mathematics that keeps Pentagon planners awake at night. The United States started this conflict with roughly 8,000 interceptor missiles. We do not know exactly where that number stands now, but we are getting dangerously close to the bottom. Iran started with 45,000 missiles. There is no evidence they are anywhere close to running out. Now, you might be thinking, surely we can just manufacture more. Surely American industry can outproduce Iran. But here is the brutal reality. Modern precision-guided missiles take months to produce. The supply chains are complex. The components are specialized. You cannot simply flip a switch and generate thousands of new interceptors overnight. And while we scramble to reload, Iran continues to strike with weapons so advanced that engineers who have examined the data describe their achievements as impressive as hell. Every target they hit, they devastate. The technology they have developed represents a quantum leap in missile capabilities that Western intelligence simply failed to anticipate. Now, I need you to understand something critical about what happens next, because the decisions being made right now will determine the fate of the entire region for generations to come. There is talk in Washington about boots on the ground. There are voices calling for an invasion of Kharg Island, where over 90% of Iranian oil refining takes place. Some believe this would deliver the knockout blow that air power alone has failed to achieve. Let me be absolutely clear about what that would mean. Today's United States Army is a fraction of its former self. Go back 30 years, and we had 800,000 men in uniform. We were able to deploy 300,000 troops to the Persian Gulf for Desert Storm. We cannot do that now. We simply do not have those forces available. And even if we did, the nature of warfare has fundamentally changed. All you have to do is look at eastern Ukraine to understand what modern ground combat looks like. Any force that cannot control the space above it will be paralyzed. Drones of every size, from small quadcopters carrying grenades to massive strike platforms, dominate the battlefield. We are not trained for this. We are not equipped for this. We are not prepared for this. But here is what most people completely fail to grasp, and this is crucial. Stay with me because this changes everything. Modern satellite-based intelligence gives your opponent persistent surveillance of everything you do on the ground. Everything. Every ship that enters a harbor, every troop transport that lands, every piece of equipment that rolls off a cargo vessel. Your enemy sees it all in real time. So imagine we decided to be clever and land forces on the Syrian coast to shorten the march to Iran. By the time we selected the harbor and started bringing in ships, we would be targeted with precision-guided missiles. They would do enormous damage. They would kill thousands of men before a single soldier took a step toward the enemy. You cannot repeat what we did in 1990 and 1991. That slow, ponderous buildup where we took months to position forces before striking. The battlefield has evolved, our strategies have not. And despite what you hear from certain voices in Washington, the notion that air and naval power alone can achieve enduring strategic outcomes is simply absurd. We have been through this so many times, it does not work. All it normally does is make things worse. Which brings me to what Iran is actually demanding and why every American needs to understand what is coming. Professor Sayed Mohammad Marandi, one of the most influential voices in Iranian strategic thinking, recently made a statement that should echo through every corridor of power in Washington. He said Iran does not support the status quo. They will not live with an existential threat from Israel. They will not tolerate countries across the Persian Gulf providing access, support, and assistance to their enemies. Do you understand what that means? When this war ends, and it will end, American military forces will not be welcome in the Persian Gulf. We will not be allowed to maintain bases in the Middle East. We will not be permitted to stage military power directed at Iran or anyone else from that region. That is not negotiable from their perspective. That is the starting point for any discussion. Now, you might be thinking, how can we possibly accept that? How can the United States simply abandon decades of military presence in one of the most strategically vital regions on Earth? But ask yourself this question. What exactly has that military presence accomplished in the last year? Have we protected our allies in the Gulf? The answer is no. Their oil infrastructure has been struck repeatedly. Their ports have been damaged. Their economies have been devastated. Have we protected Israel? We have tried. We have shipped THAAD radars and missiles. We have diverted resources from other critical regions, including pulling systems from South Korea, and still the attacks continue. Still the missiles get through. Still the damage accumulates. If you are sitting in Saudi Arabia or the Emirates or Kuwait right now, you are watching where all the defensive systems are going. They are going to Israel, not to you. Every interceptor, every radar system, every piece of advanced equipment flows to Tel Aviv while Gulf states absorb strike after strike. So when Iran eventually says America must leave, will those Gulf states really object? They now know with absolute certainty that we cannot protect them. Our presence has not made them safer. It has made them targets. Here is where the story becomes truly extraordinary, and I need you to pay close attention because what I am about to explain has never happened before in modern history. The old order in the Middle East, what historians call the Sykes Picot arrangement, is dead. That system was established over a century ago when European powers carved up the region into spheres of influence. It has defined the political map of the Middle East ever since, and it is collapsing before our eyes. The Muslim populations across these countries have had enough. Even if their wealthy elites who enjoy the good life disagree, the vast majority of Arabs, Turks, and Persians have reached their limit. They have watched Gaza, they have watched Lebanon, they have watched Iran endure bombardment after bombardment, and they are asking the same question billions of people around the world are asking. Why? Why would the United States implement a draft and raise 1 million men and move them 6,000 miles to attack people in Iran? What is the strategic purpose? Was Iran ever actually a threat to America? And people know the answers. We have been listening to lies for years. Iran has supposedly been 2 weeks from a nuclear weapon for at least 3 decades. And we were told that if they got one, they would immediately use it against America. Why? For what possible reason? There is none. It was always propaganda designed to justify aggression. But here's what happens next. And this is where things get truly dangerous. Iran has made it clear they will not negotiate. They will not accept any deal that leaves the current situation intact. They have been pushed past the point of compromise. Every hospital we have destroyed, every school we have leveled, every civilian neighborhood we have devastated has only strengthened their resolve. This is Persia. This country has existed for 2,700 years. It has survived invasions, occupations, and catastrophes that would have broken lesser nations. It has no intention of surrendering or capitulating. Anyone who thinks otherwise is delusional. And here is the tragic irony that Washington completely failed to anticipate. We bet everything on internal uprising. We believed that if we inflicted enough damage, the Iranian people would overthrow their government. We thought they would blame their leaders rather than the foreign power bombing their cities. But the opposite has happened. Before this war, Iran was genuinely moving toward political change. The population was ready for something new, something beyond the old Islamic Republic. We could have seen a different government emerge naturally, peacefully, through internal evolution. Instead, we bombed them. And in doing so, we unified the country behind its leadership. We pushed back that natural evolution by years, perhaps decades. And here is the worst part. No matter who eventually comes to power in Iran, they will hate us. We have done enormous damage. We are not going to have a friend in that country for a very, very long time. Now I have to address something that keeps surfacing in discussions about this conflict, and it involves the most dangerous weapons ever created. There are voices, though they speak quietly, who suggest that nuclear weapons might be the answer, that a decisive strike could end this conflict once and for all. Let me tell you why that will not happen and why the very suggestion reveals desperation rather than strategy. President Trump, whatever else you might say about him, understands that using nuclear weapons would be catastrophic. He is justifiably opposed to it. He sees it correctly as the worst possible outcome because once you use a nuclear weapon, you normalize its use. You open a door that can never be closed. The Russians, the Chinese, the Pakistanis, the Indians, every nuclear power on Earth will recalculate their own postures. The consequences would be unpredictable and potentially civilization ending. But here is what concerns strategic analysts the most. Israel faces an existential equation. If they believe their survival is genuinely threatened, what decisions might they make? They possess nuclear weapons. They have always maintained what they call nuclear ambiguity. But in extremis, what would they do? And this raises a terrifying possibility. What if the power dynamic between the United States and Israel is not what we have been told? What if Netanyahu exercises more authority over American policy than American leaders exercise over Israeli actions? The Zionist billionaires who fund political campaigns, who control media empires, who direct financial institutions, they have enormous influence in Washington. Members of Congress depend on their support. Presidents seek their approval. The relationship between American power and Israeli interests has become so intertwined that separating them seems almost impossible. So, how do we disengage from this war without creating a serious breach with Israel? And what would that breach mean here inside the United States for any political leader who attempts it? These are questions without easy answers, but they must be confronted. Now, let me tell you about something happening right now that demolishes the narrative we have been fed for months. As I am speaking to you, Hezbollah just launched over 100 rockets toward Israel. 100. This is the organization that was supposedly destroyed. This is the force that Israeli and American officials claimed had been completely eradicated, and yet they continue to fire barrages that light up the night sky over Israeli territory. Think about what that means. Either intelligence agencies have been lying about Hezbollah's capabilities, or their assessments were catastrophically wrong. Neither option is comforting, and it gets worse. There are reports, initially from CBS, then CNN, and now ABC, that Iran has begun mining the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this is significant because the strait is the choke point through which roughly 20% of the world's oil passes. Mining it would be an escalation with global consequences. Some analysts dispute these reports. Macron himself said he has seen no evidence of mining operations, and there is a logical question. The strait is already effectively closed to Western shipping. What would be the point of mining it unless Iran is sending a message, unless they are saying, stop your attacks or we will make this permanent in ways that take years to undo? The implications are staggering. Demining operations are slow, dangerous, and imperfect. A mined waterway remains hazardous long after the conflict ends. If Iran has truly begun laying mines, they are not just fighting the current war, they are shaping the battlefield for whatever comes next. But here is what should alarm every person watching this, regardless of where you live. The damage already done will take years to repair. Not months, years. Oil infrastructure that has been struck across the region cannot simply be rebuilt overnight. The economic shock waves are rippling outward in every direction. In Europe, energy costs have surged 70 to 90%. In Asia, 50 to 100%. Even in the United States, which has partially insulated itself through domestic production, electricity costs, industrial goods, and monetary policy are all feeling the pressure. We have turned our allies into impoverished states with no energy. Currency volatility is off the charts. The fragile global financial system is straining under pressures it was never designed to withstand. And here is the cruel irony. The only two countries that have actually benefited financially from this disaster are Russia, obviously, and the United States. Everyone else, our allies in Europe, our partners in Asia, the Gulf states we claim to protect, they are all suffering. This is what happens when you wage war without strategy, when you establish objectives that are fundamentally unattainable, when you assume your enemy will simply collapse because you wish it so. Now, let me explain what the future probably holds, because understanding what comes next is essential. Iran will not stop fighting just because America says it wants the war to end. They have made their position clear. They want regime change in Israel. They want the current government in Tel Aviv removed. They want guarantees that what happened to them can never happen again. And they have leverage to demand these things: the Strait of Hormuz, the oil infrastructure of the Gulf, the continued ability to strike targets throughout the region. They have demonstrated that their military capabilities remain intact despite months of bombardment. So, what are we going to do? Are we going to say we will stay in the Gulf indefinitely while they continue to attack? That is not sustainable. The American people have no appetite for permanent warfare in the Middle East. They never wanted this conflict. They do not understand why their sons and daughters should die for objectives that have never been clearly explained. Eventually, there will have to be an arrangement, and that arrangement will probably reward Iran for withstanding American power. They will emerge from this conflict with increased influence, increased prestige, and increased ability to shape the regional order. Meanwhile, we will be forced to accept a diminished role: fewer bases, less influence, reduced ability to project power in a region that has been central to American strategic thinking for 70 years. Some would call that defeat. Others would call it the inevitable consequence of overreach. But whatever you call it, it is coming. The question is whether we manage the transition intelligently or whether we stumble into even greater catastrophe by refusing to accept reality. There is one more dimension to this story that deserves attention, and it concerns the broader global order. Remember that Ukraine war that dominated headlines for so long? It has not ended. Russia continues to advance. Their economy has been strengthened, not weakened, by Western sanctions. Their military has gained invaluable combat experience, and Europe, which bet everything on Russian collapse, now faces energy poverty and political instability. The Germans will likely have a new government soon. The French are in crisis. Britain desperately needs leadership that understands the new realities. And all of this creates opportunities for Russia to achieve objectives that seemed impossible 2 years ago. Some analysts predict that this year Russia will take Odessa, giving them complete control of Ukraine's Black Sea coast. They may effectively control Kharkiv, and then the question becomes whether they advance on Kiev to end the conflict entirely. The unintended consequences of our wars are cascading across the globe. We fought in the Gulf to destroy Iran, and we may have accelerated the collapse of Western influence across the entire Middle East. We sanctioned Russia to bring them to their knees, and we may have handed them victories they could never have achieved on the battlefield alone. This is what happens when strategy is replaced by wishful thinking, when leaders convince themselves that their enemies are weak simply because they want them to be weak, when mirror imaging replaces actual intelligence, when decision makers assume their opponents will behave as Americans would behave in the same circumstances. The Iranians are not Americans. They do not share our values or our vulnerabilities. They have a civilizational memory stretching back millennia. They have endured invasions by Greeks, Arabs, Mongols, and others. They are still here. They are still standing, and they have no intention of submitting to foreign demands simply because those demands are backed by firepower. Here is the fundamental lesson that Washington refuses to learn. You cannot bomb a nation into compliance. You cannot terrorize a people into loving you. You cannot destroy your way to peace. Every missile that strikes a hospital creates more enemies. Every bomb that falls on a school generates more resistance. Every civilian death strengthens the resolve of survivors to fight until the last breath. The Germans learned this in World War II. The Japanese learned it. The Vietnamese taught it to us and we forgot. The Afghans taught it to us again and we forgot again. And now the Iranians are teaching it once more, and still we refuse to learn. When will we understand that military force has limits? That nations with strong identities and deep historical roots cannot simply be erased from existence, that the world is not ours to remake according to our preferences. These are the questions that haunt every honest strategist. These are the realities that no amount of propaganda can obscure. And these are the truths that will eventually force a reckoning, whether Washington is ready for it or not. The age of American hegemony in the Middle East is ending. The question is not whether it will end, but how. Will we manage a graceful transition that preserves some influence and some relationships, or will we cling to delusions of control until we are forced out in humiliation? The choice is still ours, but the window for making it wisely is closing fast. Every day this conflict continues, our options narrow. Every strike that fails to achieve its objectives reveals the limits of our power. Every ally that loses faith in our protection looks for alternatives. China is watching, Russia is watching, India is watching, the entire global south is watching. And they are all drawing conclusions about American power and American judgment that will shape international relations for decades to come. This is not just a war in the Middle East. This is a test of whether the American-led order can survive its own contradictions, whether the values we claim to represent can withstand the reality of what we actually do, whether the institutions we built to maintain peace can adapt to a world where we are no longer the unchallenged superpower. The answers to these questions are being written right now in the flames over Tehran, in the missiles streaking toward Tel Aviv, in the tankers stranded outside the Strait of Hormuz, in the capitals of Europe and Asia, where leaders are quietly recalculating their assumptions about who they can trust and who they should fear. Pay attention. This is history unfolding in real time. And whatever happens next, the world that emerges from this conflict will be fundamentally different from the one that existed before. Don't stop here. The world is full of truths waiting to be uncovered. Click on the next video and join us as we break down even more critical developments that mainstream media refuses to cover honestly.